Hello, and welcome to the Hybrid School Builders Podcast. I am your host, Rebecca Foley, and I am so glad you are joining me today. I am a fellow grassroots founder who is hoping to make your journey toward founding a sustainable hybrid school a little bit easier. If you are dreaming of starting a hybrid school, or perhaps you've already gotten started, you are in the right place. Join me as we dive into real stories, practical tips, and hard-won lessons that I have learned to help you launch and grow your program with confidence. Remember, building a hybrid school is not just about creating a business or creating jobs. It's not even about just serving the children who attend the program. It's literally about reshaping the landscape of education, and we can do that one community, one entrepreneur, and one program at a time. Okay, hey guys, so at the risk of making myself sound like an unorganized person, I wanted to do a quick episode on organization. And that's because, yes, I am not a super organized person in the sense that I forget my pencil and my pad of paper when I go to a meeting because everything is in my head and I forget the practical things. And I lose things in Google Drive folders and on my computer all the time. If you are a very organized person who has multiple copies of everything clearly labeled, you probably don't need to listen to this episode. But I want to just give you some tips because unless you are an extremely organized person, there's a lot of just paperwork, things that need to be shared, things that need to be filed that can get just like scattered or put in the wrong place or put in a personal place where it shouldn't be. And so it saves you a lot of time. And if you're a nonprofit, especially, and it tax time for anybody, it just saves you a lot of time and hassle and possibly money if you just keep track of all of this from the beginning. So just a couple of tips. Now, most things are digital nowadays. I am most familiar with Google. So what I advise using a shared drive, not just a drive, not just a My Drive, even if it's under your business email, but a shared drive and saving all of your documents in clearly labeled folders there, okay? Especially if you're a nonprofit. If you are not a nonprofit, you may not need to do this, but you still want to have a business account, almost certainly, all right? So to back up on that, what you want to do is set up an email address with your business name in it instead of using your personal. Do that early on, okay? If you're using Squarespace, they give you one email address through Google. If you would like to do that altogether, if you can get access to G Suite education or for nonprofits, you get multiple email addresses that you can assign to later on to staff and all of that, which is very handy, but you do have to, well, you can pay for it. You can certainly pay for it if you would like. You can get it for free if under certain conditions. You have to look that up. It's changes. When I was able to access G Suite for education as a homeschool group, a few years ago, there were some hoops to jump through, but I did eventually get it set up. But I think it's actually changed since then. So you have to do a little searching, or if you're familiar with something else, use something you're familiar with. But the first thing you want is an email address for yourself with your business address. And that's what you're going to be using on your website. Then hopefully attached to that, you have some sort of file storage like Google Drive. And you're going to keep all of your business documentation in there. So you're going to have your official stuff like your articles of incorporation, any letters you get from the state, anything you get from the IRS. Put all the copies of all of that as much as you can in a folder that's labeled for that, okay? But then as you continue to develop more things, you want to keep those in separate files. Now, if you're a nonprofit, your secretary of your board needs to make sure that they're keeping, and I think I've mentioned this before, but they need to be keeping all of the official documentation. They need to be keeping the filing, dates, the calendars, anything from the state saying that you no longer need to pay state sales tax, IRS stuff, saying that you're a 501c3 when you get that. The secretary is legally responsible. The board needs to have all of that, okay? The best way to do that is to put it in a shared drive so that it can be passed along to other secretaries. Because sometimes there's a double problem that happens with nonprofit boards. Well, the first mistake is that it gets put in somebody's personal email or personal filing. And then it's really hard to share it later on. But even if they're given like a, secretary at a special email address and a special drive, which again is very helpful, you should try to do that if you can, because then as you get new secretaries, new presidents, new treasurers over the years, you want to be able to pass that same email on to them, and it's only used as that officer of the board. So if you can pass the email on, I guess the shared drive isn't as important, but a shared drive is like the business drive. So it can be shared with all of the board members. They can be added to it as they change, and it's just belongs to the business, okay? The secretary in a nonprofit should set up that shared drive, and they should just be filing all of that away. And then all the secretaries from then on out should be using that same drive, and they can use a secretary at or something like that email address as well. Keeping a paper trail, which is now usually a digital paper trail, is generally a good idea. So just file things away and keep copies of it, okay? Where sometimes I think things can get lost is especially when you're first starting out and it's just you doing the paperwork all by your lonesome self. Sometimes you end up like, well, I'm using my own personal email address. And then, you might have to do that, in the beginning. If you don't have to, don't. But if you do, that's okay. Just forward it all as soon as you can to that new email, that new drive, and send it all over there and keep copies of it somewhere else. Because then things start to grow and get more complex, and you realize that I started out in my personal and then I switched over to, a business one, but now I can't find anything if you're like me. And you can't find anything because you buried it in your personal because it was the first 6 months or something like that, okay? So it's just something it's one of those infrastructure things that's fairly simple. If you just take the time to set it up in the beginning and then move forward with it, it just saves you a lot of time later on. And there's even things like, a chart of accounts, which I'll talk about somewhere else. That's just the language that you use on your bank account transactions, like how you label transactions. Is it office supplies, classroom supplies, furniture, payroll, service, salaries? There might be a dozen or so general categories, but specific enough that you know what it was that you want to label your transactions as. And there's other layers. You can add tags and all that kind of thing, which is good if you possibly can, but at least you want to label. If you just create a chart of accounts, and it's, you might just create a table in a document or on an Excel sheet or something, and you just create it so that if you have another bookkeeper come along or a treasurer or, you hire someone to help you with this, if from the beginning you just create it and you think proactively a little bit and say, here's the language I'm going to use for this. I'm going to write it all in a little document and I'm just going to save it. I'm just going to save it in a bookkeeping file or something. And then I could share that with whoever is relevant. So we all speak the same language. We're all labeling things with the same language. It's pass it along to an accountant or a bookkeeper. And it's just going to save you a ton of time later on if you just think through saving that, okay? I have done this with even hiring. So when you first hire your first employees and you're deciding how much pay you're going to pay them, which might be a little different depending on their experience, that kind of thing, is you might just create a quick table and in a document somewhere and just record it. You're hiring this person, there's their name. This is the year that they started. Here's their salary for the year, okay? Because later, 2, 3, 4 years, 5, 6 years down the road, if you've been adding to that, you could see I need to give this maybe you're giving all your employees a 2 or 3, 4% raise, which you have to plan for that and you have to know where the money's coming from. You can't just do it. Usually you got to raise tuition a little or fundraise a little or, whatever. But you do want to have a plan for that. But you want to be able to look back. And especially if you're kind of doing the tighten your belt the first year thing, where you don't do that to your employees, but maybe you're doing it to yourself or you're, wearing a bunch of hats yourself and you're only making not as much as you would like to because you're still waiting for enrollment to fill or something. Very common. Don't plan on it in the long run, but do it in the short run. I can't say that enough. Okay. It's okay to do it for a year or maybe 2, but write it down. You got to write it down. Okay. Because then you have a record of here's where the money was going. And now it's going to be in your bookkeeping. But if you are able to say like, well, we hired this person at this rate, maybe make a little note, here's why. And then, or, rate, whether it's hourly or salary or whatever. And then the next year, here's what their pay would be the next year. Here's what their pay would be the next year. And you could just kind of like add a column with a 2% raise or 3% raise or something so that you know what your new salaries are going to be when it comes time to do your planning budget for the next year, and look at where, if people are returning and you want them to come back, you want to be able to offer them a raise. Hopefully when you offer them the return of the job, okay, this is another kind of organizational thing. You might want to get like a letter of intent or a form of intent or something. This is assuming your teachers, your staff are signing like a 1-year contract with you. It might be January or February, and you send out a form intent and say, do you plan on coming back next year? Obviously, this is assuming you want them back next year. But maybe around the time you're doing yearly evaluations or afterward or before, whatever, whatever works for you in a good dynamic. Are you planning on coming back next year in the fall, assuming a regular school year? So that it's nice if you can tell them that you're going to be offering them a 2 or 3% raise, if that's what you're planning on doing at that time. It helps them know what your value is of them. And it helps, help them plan and helps them set that expectation for the upcoming year. So if you can do that, it's just nice to be able to have all of that recorded. Your planning budget should probably be done at that point. So like your planning budget for September should probably be done the previous December. So yes, you're running almost a year ahead of time, but there's pieces of information you need on them. So I mentioned this in the facility agreement. You need to know from your facility if you can come back and if your rent is going to go up, right? You need to know that before you finalize your budget, okay? You need to know the same thing about your employees, what new positions you're going to need, if you're going to give people raises. There's some things you won't know for sure, but you should probably plan on having a bit of a increase in some of the costs, at least whatever inflation is at the time. So you also want to be planning ahead for tuition increases. Families like to know and not just get hit with we had no raise this year, but then we had a 5% raise the next year. It's better to just say, well, we're going to give everybody a 2.5% raise every year or something. And we're expecting costs to go up about that. So we're going to raise tuition 2% every year or 3% every year or, 1.5%. And then we're going to fundraise if you're a nonprofit. We're going to fundraise the other 1.5% every year. That's going to be how we keep tuition down, is to fundraise. Okay, something like that. If you think ahead with that organizationally and then keep your records so you know what everybody's pay was, how long they've been working for you, what they got hired at, what the raise is going to be for each year. All of those things filed away in a folder so it can be shared with your treasurer, shared with your planning people, shared with whoever is doing, helping you with this planning, assuming someone's helping you with the planning. But even if, and this is, again, especially if you're a nonprofit where the business needs to be it's not just you, it's bigger than you, right? So if you were to leave or move or something were to happen where you couldn't work the position anymore, you needed to have all of those files for the next director to be able to go back and say, okay, this is how we started, this is how much everyone was getting paid and all of that, okay? And be able to reference all of that and see what was done in the past and just make note of it, okay? So hopefully that was just helpful as you're thinking ahead. Like I said, it could be extremely obvious to you and you're already doing this if you're one of those naturally organized people. But if you're someone or sometimes you're just busy, you're just busy, there's a lot to do. And you're like, well, I'll go search my email for it later, or I'll save it to my computer or whatever. But if you can just take a few minutes to set up the email, set up the drive, set up those folders, label them by year, label them with a clear name, label every document the same way, and just put it all, save it all into those places, and then have overviews, chart of accounts, pay for people, a bit of a plan for increasing costs and all of that. And you just have that all filed away organizationally. That really helps in the future. So you always know where to go back, reference. There was more than one time where when I was kind to my future self, I was like, oh wait, I think I made a chart for this. And I forgot that I did it. But then it comes to me when I'm redoing it. I go back, oh, look at that. I made a whole table a year or two ago, a couple years ago or something. And I found the table. I was able to find it And I didn't have to go search all this stuff out. It was there. I didn't have to go into payroll, look for how much this person made last year, whatever. It was all right there because I recorded it. And I could see each person's name and I could see how much they made in the last 3 years. It was all in a table. And I was able to plan with a quick reference sheet for them. Okay. So just something to think about that helps you stay organized. Thanks so much for listening today. Don't forget to subscribe and make sure you check out the resources I am developing at startahybridSchool.com. Send me an email anytime. I would love to hear from you. Until next time.